The boardroom on the 48th floor of Croft Industries was a theater of glass and cold steel, designed to reflect power back at those who sought it. Sunlight, sharp and unforgiving, cut across a vast mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen. At its head sat Annalise Croft, a figure of composed stillness in a world of frantic ambition. Her dark green coat was draped over the back of her chair, its severe lines a stark contrast to the soft beige of the dress she wore. Her attention was fixed on the adjoining training space, visible through a one-way pane of armored glass. Inside, a procession of men, each a caricature of strength with swollen biceps and necks as thick as pylons, vied for her protection. She watched their displays of clumsy, brutish force with a disinterest that bordered on contempt. They were hammers, and she suspected her problem required a scalpel. Her current head of security, Marcus Thorne, a man whose ambition had long outstripped his competence, paraded the candidates with the pride of a livestock auctioneer. Then the doors to the waiting area slid open, and a different kind of man entered. He was of average height, with a lean, wiry build that seemed almost fragile next to the others. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet fluidity that drew Annalise's eye. But it was the small hand held firmly in his that truly arrested her attention. A little girl, no older than 7, stood beside him, a vibrant splash of red in the monochrome world of corporate security. The man, Jae-wha, scanned the room not with the challenging gaze of a competitor, but with the cautious assessment of a father searching for threats. Marcus Thorne's lip curled. "This is a professional evaluation, not a daycare. You can leave the accessory in the lobby." Some of the other contenders, giants in ill-fitting suits, chuckled. Jae-wha's expression did not change. He simply knelt, his eyes meeting his daughter's. "Stay right here, Hannah. See the tall buildings." He pointed through the window, his voice a low murmur only she could hear. Annalise leaned forward slightly, her focus narrowing, filtering out the noise of the room until only the man and the child remained. She saw not a warrior, but a protector, his entire being oriented around the small, trusting girl in the red dress. He was an anomaly, a question mark in a room full of predictable answers. The tryouts continued, a monotonous display of choreographed violence. The current favorite, a mountain of a man named Gregor with a shaved head and a web of tattoos crawling up his neck, was a study in brute force. His opponent was a former Marine, fit and disciplined, but Gregor moved through his defenses like a battering ram. There was no technique, only overwhelming power. A heavy-handed block, a shove that sent the man stumbling, and a finishing grapple that left him tapping out on the mat, gasping for air. Marcus clapped loudly, his approval echoing in the stark room. "That's what I'm talking about. Pure dominance." Unstoppable from her silent vantage point, Annalise disagreed. She saw a dozen openings Gregor's wild swings created, moments of vulnerability that a more intelligent fighter could have exploited. He was predictable, a blunt instrument for a blunt threat. The danger she felt closing in on her was not blunt. It was subtle, a whisper in the corporate machine, a shadow she could feel but not yet see. Anonymous messages on encrypted servers, financial data that shifted by fractions of a percentage overnight, the unnerving sense of being watched even within her own fortress. Gregor could stop a man with a gun, perhaps. But could he see the poison in the glass? Could he read the lie in a trusted colleague's eyes? She doubted it. Her gaze drifted back to Jae-wha. He was sitting on a bench against the far wall, his back straight, a sentinel at rest. Hannah was leaning against his side, her head on his shoulder, tracing patterns on the worn fabric of his trousers. He had taken off his plain jacket and draped it over her, a small, tender gesture that seemed profoundly out of place. He wasn't watching the fight. He was watching the room, his eyes sweeping across the architecture, the entry points, the faces of the staff moving in the periphery. He was assessing the environment, not the competition. Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt all day. Curiosity. Marcus was looking for a guard dog. She was looking for a ghost. Marcus Thorne, enjoying the ripple of intimidation Gregor had created, surveyed the remaining candidates. His eyes landed on Jaehwa, and a malicious smile spread across his face. This would be entertaining. It would reassert the proper order of things. You, he barked, pointing a thumb at the quiet man. The father. You're up. A few of the men snickered again, the sound oily and contemptuous. Gregor, still breathing heavily from his previous exertion, rolled his thick shoulders and grinned, seeing an easy finish. Jaehwa showed no reaction. He looked down at Hannah, his expression softening. He spoke to her in low, melodic Korean, a language that sounded alien and soft in the harsh, angular room. He took the jacket from her shoulders and carefully folded it, placing it on the bench. "Count for me," he said in clear English, his voice steady. "To 3. Slowly. He kissed the top of her head and walked toward the mat. He moved with a strange, weightless grace, his feet making no sound on the polished floor. Marcus leaned toward one of his underlings. "Get the medic ready. And get this guy's waiver signed." He turned his voice up for the room to hear. "Try not to get hurt in front of your kid." Jaehwa stepped onto the mat, his posture relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. He faced Gregor, a man who outweighed him by 100 pounds of solid muscle. He gave a short, formal bow, a gesture of respect that Gregor answered with a belligerent snort. Hannah's voice, small and clear, echoed in the sudden quiet. One Gregor charged. It was not a run but a stampede, the mat thudding under his weight. He threw a looping right hook, a punch meant to end the fight before it began. Jaehwa didn't retreat. He flowed. In a single, liquid movement, he slipped inside the arc of the punch, his left hand rising not to block, but to guide the massive arm past his head. His right hand, held stiffly, jabbed twice, almost too fast to see. Not punches, but surgical strikes. The first to the floating ribs, the second to the brachial plexus nerve cluster in Gregor's shoulder. A jolt of white-hot agony shot down Gregor's arm, making it go instantly numb and useless. His momentum carried him forward, stumbling. Jaehwa pivoted on the ball of his left foot, his body a whisper of movement. His right elbow came up in a short, brutal arc, connecting precisely with the mastoid process behind Gregor's ear. Gregor's eyes rolled back in his head. He crumpled, not falling but folding, his body collapsing onto the mat like a dropped coat. 2. A profound, echoing silence descended upon the room. It was heavier than the thud of Gregor's unconscious body, thicker than the scent of sweat and fear. The men who had been smirking moments before now stared, their mouths slightly agape, their minds struggling to process what their eyes had just witnessed. It had been over in less time than it took to draw a breath. There had been no struggle, no contest. It was like watching a surgeon remove a tumor, an act of clean, absolute, and terrifying precision. Marcus Thorne's face was a canvas of shock, the smug certainty draining away to be replaced by a pale, slack-jawed confusion. His authority, built on the currency of predictable strength, had just been rendered worthless. He looked from Gregor's still form to the unassuming man standing over him, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear entered his eyes. He saw not a competitor, but an executioner. Jaehwa did not gloat. He did not even look at the fallen giant at his feet. His gaze was already back on his daughter. He stepped off the mat, his movements as unhurried and deliberate as before. He walked to the bench where Hannah sat, her eyes wide not with fear, but with a kind of solemn understanding. 3, she said, her voice soft but firm, completing her task. Jaehwa picked up his jacket and gently placed it back over her small shoulders, pulling the collar up around her neck. He was a father again. The brief, violent interruption was over. The whole world, for him, had contracted back to this single point of contact, his hand resting on her shoulder. The rest of the room, the stunned faces, the downed opponent, might as well have been on another planet. From behind the glass, Annalise Croft stood up. The movement was sharp, decisive. She pressed a small button on the console in front of her, and her voice, calm and laced with ice, filled the training room. "Mr. Thorne, my office." Now, her command cut through the paralyzed atmosphere like a blade. Marcus flinched as if struck. Annalise's gaze then moved, locking onto Jaehwa. You, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Wait here. She turned and walked out of the observation room, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble floor. Annalise's office was an extension of her mind, ordered, expansive, and with a view that stripped away all trivialities. The city spread out below the floor-to-ceiling windows, a complex machine of interlocking parts. Marcus Thorne stood before her desk, looking small and flustered, the sheen of sweat on his forehead visible even in the cool, filtered light. An accident, he stammered, his hands fidgeting. A lucky shot. The man has no discipline. He's a street brawler. We can't have someone like that protecting you. It's a liability. Annalise let the silence stretch, watching him unravel. She had inherited Marcus from her father, a legacy of a blunter, more straightforward era. Her father had needed a man who could handle bar fights and paparazzi. She needed someone who could navigate a boardroom assassination. A lucky shot, Marcus, she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. I saw no luck. I saw efficiency. I saw an opponent neutralized with minimum effort and maximum effect. I saw a man who understood leverage and anatomy. What you call a street brawler, I call precise. She gestured vaguely toward the window. The threats against this company, against me, are not coming from brawlers. They're coming from whispers in hallways. They're coming from encrypted files and compromised accounts. They're subtle. And your candidate for dealing with this subtlety was Grigor? The name hung in the air, an accusation in itself. Marcus flushed a deeper shade of red. He is physically imposing. A deterrent. He is a scarecrow, Marcus. And we're not being attacked by crows. She picked up a single, unmarked data chip from her desk. This arrived yesterday. Bypassed all your firewalls. All your protocols. It contains a schematic of my entire travel itinerary for the next month, including 2 trips that were never entered into the official system. Explain that. Marcus stared at the chip as if it were a snake. He had no explanation. He was a man of fences and locks in an age of digital ghosts. He was obsolete, and in that moment he knew it. Annalise's eyes were cold. The man downstairs, the father you were so quick to mock, saw more by watching the room for 5 minutes than your team has seen in 5 weeks. He wasn't watching the fight. He was watching the exits. He was watching the staff. He was watching everything except what you wanted him to watch. I want competence, Marcus. I don't care what package it comes in. Annalise swept back into the training room, her presence immediately silencing the low murmurs that had started to bubble up. The other candidates, who had been staring at Jaehwa with a mixture of awe and suspicion, now averted their eyes as she approached. She gave a curt nod to one of Marcus's subordinates. The evaluation is over. Thank you for your time. You may all leave. There was a clumsy shuffle as the large men collected their belongings, eager to exit a room that now felt charged with an unfamiliar tension. They gave Jaehwa a wide berth, as if he were surrounded by an invisible field of danger. Soon, the vast space was empty except for 3 people: Annalise, Jaehwa, and Hannah, who was now quietly drawing on a discarded notepad with a pen she'd found. Annalise stopped a few feet from him. Your file says you were in the Republic of Korea Army. Special Forces. Jaehwa met her gaze. His own was unnervingly still, revealing nothing. A long time ago, that wasn't army training, she stated, not a question but a fact. He didn't reply, his silence a confirmation. Who are you? I'm a man looking for a job, he said, his voice even. I need to provide for my daughter. Annalise studied him, recognizing the tactic. He was building a wall of simplicity, daring her to look past it. She knew there were layers of darkness and violence in his past that he would never willingly reveal. But she also saw the truth in his last statement. His devotion to the child was the one authentic thing about him. That was his anchor. And perhaps it could be hers as well. The position is yours, she said abruptly. Jaehwa's eyes flickered with something, surprise or perhaps regret. He looked at Hannah, a silent conversation passing between them. The job requires constant proximity. I cannot be separated from my daughter, I'm aware, Annalise said. There is a residential suite on the 40th floor. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, Private elevator access. It will be yours. I'm also arranging for a private tutor. She can have a structured education. Here, where you can see her, she saw the shift in his posture, the slight relaxing of attention she hadn't even noticed was there. She hadn't just offered him a job, she had offered him a fortress for his child. It was a masterstroke of perception, appealing not to his greed or his ego, but to his single, overwhelming vulnerability. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I accept. The apartment on the 40th floor was a cage of minimalist luxury. White walls, chrome fixtures, and windows that showcased the sprawling city like a living painting. It was clean, sterile, and soulless. It was the antithesis of the small, cluttered apartment above a noodle shop that they had called home. Jae-wha stood in the center of the living room, a ghost in a new machine. Hannah, however, was enchanted. She ran her small hands over the cool marble of the kitchen island and pressed her face against the massive window, her breath fogging the glass. "Appa, you can see the whole world," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Jae-wha felt a pang of something cold and sharp. He had brought her here for safety, enclosing her in a gilded prison to shield her from the wolves of his past. He had traded her freedom for her security. His first day on the job was a study in invisibility. He wore a simple dark suit, but it fit him differently than the others. Where their suits were armor, his was a shadow. He didn't follow Annalise, he preceded her. He moved through the gleaming corridors of Croft Industries not as a guard, but as an advanced scout, his senses on a razor's edge. His eyes didn't just see, they catalogued. He noted the janitorial staff, their routines, their access levels. He saw the slight tremor in the hand of a junior analyst delivering a report to Annalise, a tremor that spoke of fear, not just nerves. He observed the patterns of movement in the executive wing, the flow of information, the subtle hierarchies of power and influence that existed outside the official org chart. Marcus Thorne and his team saw threats as men with guns. Jae-wha saw threats in a misplaced pen, a diverted glance, a conversation that stopped too abruptly when he entered a room. In the afternoon, he stood by the window of Annalise's office while she conducted a series of video conferences. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the reflection in the glass, monitoring the hallway behind him, the elevators, the entire ecosystem of the floor. He was a predator learning the rhythms of a new jungle, identifying the scent of other, more dangerous predators hiding in plain sight. He was home. Alistair Finch, a senior member of the Croft Industries board, moved with the predatory grace of a shark gliding through calm water. He was handsome in a way that spoke of old money and expensive schools, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile a disarming weapon. He entered Annalise's office carrying a leather-bound portfolio, his demeanor one of concerned partnership. "Annalise, my dear," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "I just wanted to touch base on the Omnicorp merger. There are some troubling undercurrents we need to discuss." Annalise greeted him with cool professionalism, gesturing for him to sit. Jae-wha stood near the door, motionless, his presence as unobtrusive as a piece of furniture. Alistair glanced at him for a fraction of a second, a flicker of dismissal in his eyes, before turning his full attention back to Annalise. He was the polished adversary, a man who used the language of collaboration to mask his ruthless intent. He spoke of synergy and market consolidation, but Jae-wha heard the subtext of annexation and control. He watched Alistair's body language, a language more honest than his words. The easy confidence in his posture, the way his hands were steepled, a gesture of innate superiority. But there was a tell. When Annalise pushed back on a particular point, questioning the valuation of an Omnicorp subsidiary, Alistair's smile tightened for a barest fraction of a second. A micro-expression of contempt, so fleeting it was almost subliminal. But Jae-wha saw it. He saw the predator's frustration when the prey refused to walk meekly into the trap. The meeting concluded with handshakes and false promises. As Alistair left the office, Jae-wha's eyes followed him. In the hallway, Alistair paused, ostensibly to check his watch. At that moment, Marcus Thorne rounded the corner. Alistair accidentally bumped into him, a clumsy, staged encounter. "Marcus, so sorry," Alistair said, placing a hand on Thorne's arm to steady him. Lost in thought. "No problem, Mr. Finch," Marcus replied, his tone deferential. The exchange lasted no more than 5 seconds. A hand on an arm. A shared, meaningless glance. But Jaewa saw the discreet pressure of Alistair's thumb on Thorne's wrist, a signal. He saw the almost imperceptible nod Marcus gave in return. It was not an accident. It was a confirmation. A pawn acknowledging his master. The pieces on the board were beginning to reveal themselves. The burn of the threat was slow, a creeping heat that was now beginning to lick at the edges of their gilded sanctuary. The next evening, as Annalise prepared to leave for a charity gala, Jaewa conducted his final sweep. Marcus's team had already given the car their standard, perfunctory check. Jaewa's inspection was different. He didn't just look, he felt. He ran his fingers along the undercarriage, his touch as sensitive as a surgeon's. He checked the pressure of the tires not with a gauge, but with the calibrated force of his thumb. And then he found it. Tucked behind the front left wheel, almost invisible against the dark metal, was a small, freshly scored mark on the hydraulic brake line. It was a professional job, a deep cut designed not to sever the line immediately, but to cause it to burst under the repeated pressure of high-speed driving on the freeway. It would look like a catastrophic mechanical failure.
Un tragique accident.
He straightened up, his face impassive, but his mind was a storm of calculations. The gala was across town. The route involved a long stretch of open highway. The failure would have occurred at maximum velocity, leaving no chance for survival. He walked to the driver, a man from Marcus's team, who was polishing the hood. "The car is not secure," Jaewa said, his voice flat. The driver scoffed. "We just cleared it. It's clean." Jaewa didn't argue. He simply opened the passenger door as Annalise approached, her evening gown shimmering under the garage lights. "We will take the backup vehicle," he stated. Annalise paused, seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes. She trusted that stillness more than all of Marcus's blustering assurances. "Why?" "The brake line has been compromised." A cold dread washed over her. This was it. The abstract threat made real and immediate. She nodded, her trust in him absolute. Later that night, after a forensic analysis confirmed the sabotage, she summoned Marcus to her office. He was pale and defensive, offering a litany of excuses. "It must have been a manufacturing defect. My men are thorough." Annalise looked at him with cold pity. "You are not just incompetent, Marcus. You are a liability. You are a locked door with a key left in it. You're fired. Get out of my building." He was no longer just a fool. He was a potential accomplice, a blind spot through which the real danger could crawl. Her world had shrunk. In the vast, empty space of her life, there was only one person left she could trust. The city lights bled through the panoramic windows of Annalise's office, casting long shadows across the room. The silence between them was no longer the awkward space between an employer and an employee, but the shared quiet of two soldiers in a trench. Hannah was asleep in the adjoining private study, a small, peaceful island in a turbulent sea. "They tried to kill me tonight," Annalise said, her voice devoid of its usual commanding tone. It was the simple, stark admission of a woman who had just looked over the edge of a cliff. She stood by the window, her back to him, a solitary figure framed against the glittering abyss. Jaewa remained by the door, a silent guardian. Yes, and Marcus, he wasn't just incompetent, was he? "Alistair is using him. He is a tool," Jaewa confirmed. "A blunt one, easily manipulated by pride and fear. He clears the path without knowing who he is clearing it for." Annalise finally turned to face him, her eyes searching his. The corporate mask was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. "I've spent my life building this company into a fortress. And all this time, the enemy has been inside the walls, sitting at my table, smiling in my face. I need to know who I'm fighting." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "And I need to know who is fighting for me." "Who are you, Jaewa?" "Not the name on the file." "Who are you really?" He held her gaze, the silence stretching. He had spent years burying that man, constructing a new identity from the ashes of a life he had burned to the ground for his daughter's sake. But the past was not dead. It was merely dormant. He owed her more than a lie. "My name is Jae-wha," he began, his voice low. "In another life, I was not a soldier. I was an enforcer, the head of a family. A different kind of family. We did not build things. We broke them. I walked away from that world to keep my daughter safe from the men in it. Men like Alistair." He did not say the word mafia. He didn't need to. She understood. "Alistair isn't just a corporate raider," Jae-wha continued, the pieces clicking into place for her. "This isn't just about a merger. He has ties to organizations that operate in the shadows. He wants your company, but he wants it clean. Your death would be filed as an accident. The board would approve the Omnicorp rescue merger, and he would take control without a single drop of blood on his hands, officially. This is his endgame." Annalise absorbed the information, her mind racing. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was joined by a new, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim waiting for the next attack. She was a queen with her castle under siege. And she had found her champion. He was no knight in shining armor, but something far more valuable, a monster to fight other monsters. "What do we do?" she asked, the word, "we," sealing their alliance. Jae-wha looked past her, toward the sleeping form of his daughter. His purpose, his entire world, was crystallized in that moment. "We stop waiting for him to attack," he said, his voice a cold promise. "We hunt him first."